Boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigada pela vossa presença neste lançamento virtual do romance de Mark Haddon, O Golfinho. Antes de darmos início, queria agradecer ao Mark Haddon por se ter disponibilizado tão prontamente para esta conversa. Agradecer também ao Ricardo por ter aceitado o nosso convite. E gostaria de agradecer uma pessoa que não está aqui, espero que ela apareça, mas que é uma peça fundamental na engrenagem editorial, que é o tradutor. O Francisco Agarês fez um belíssimo trabalho neste livro, respeitando o ritmo e que ritmo este livro tem e a riqueza narrativa do autor. Mark Haddon é um escritor conceituado, com muitos livros já publicados no estrangeiro e alguns, inclusive, em Portugal, e amplamente reconhecido pela sua qualidade literária. O Golfinho, este livro tão bonito que vocês veem, chega agora à edição portuguesa pela mão da Porto Editora, mas foi publicada há cerca, mais ou menos um ano, no Reino Unido e granjeou o apreço de toda a comunicação social. Foi considerado pelos principais jornais como um dos melhores livros de 2019. E não estamos a falar de jornais tão pouco conhecidos, falamos do The Guardian, do The Washington Post, Financial Times, The Observer. Portanto, é com certeza um selo de qualidade e de umas belas horas bem passadas. Mark, it is a pleasure to have you with us. I do have to say that COVID has given us some a few good things. And even though, only a few. And even though technology already existed at a pre-COVID stage, confinement has forced us to reinvent ourselves and to make better use of that technology. In a normal scenario, it would be very difficult to have you in a session in Lisbon, and also the readers, I believe, would be fewer than I'm expecting to have today. So I say, let's make the most of this conversation and enjoy and have fun. Às pessoas que estão a assistir, eu queria lançar o repto, faço o convite, escrevam, coloquem questões, digam o que queiram perguntar ao autor, mesmo em português, não há qualquer problema, nós traduzimos, e participem. É pois hora de passar a palavra ao Mark e ao Ricardo para que partam nesta aventura no Golfinho. Mark, where you want? Please.
I shall read a short passage from the middle of the novel, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. The head of an axe rips through the upper panel of the door. Marina is in the adjacent cabin with her nurse. If the mutineers do not have her now, they will have her shortly. Pericles has no weapon, and the other men have only the knives they carry to cut themselves free of tangled rigging before it tightens and severs a foot or a hand. They all hear Lycurgus scream. Pericles is looking down on the events as if they are a game of chess. This is not the end game. There are moves available if only he can see them. The axe rips through the door again. Another blow and their attackers will be able to step through the ragged hole. He swings open the stove and uses the tongs to shovel hot coals into the chamber pot. Open the door. The surgeon is unconvinced. Pericles' hands are burning. Open the door or I swear by the gods. The surgeon withdraws the bolt. The door swings wide and Pericles throws the hot coals into the face of the midshipman who has raised his axe for the decisive blow. The man drops the axe and cries out, hands to his burnt face, jerkin smoking. Over his shoulder, Pericles sees the nurse being dragged away by the Irish cook. His baby daughter dangling from the arm of the second mate like a rabbit in a poacher's hand. He picks up the dropped axe and runs after them. What follows is the story upon which he would previously have dined out, the story he would have shelved beside many similar stories with which to entertain himself or others in the idle hours some men fill with poetry. It means nothing now. He saves his daughter and her nurse. The mutiny is crushed. He kills 7 men himself, 2 with the axe, 5 with the swords of the 2 he killed with the axe. The burly sailors commissioned to watch over the prince in his cabin now fight beside him, killing a further 6. The cook and the second mate jump overboard like devils going home after a failed raid on the world of light. Josephus and his henchmen are bound heavily, though Josephus will die of his injuries before they dock in Tarsus.
Muito boa tarde. Eu gostava de, em primeiro lugar, agradecer à Porto Editora o convite e esta oportunidade de fazer esta conversa. Mark, it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to talk with you about such an extraordinary book. In fact, I just closed the book 1 hour ago. I finished the reader, and I still can feel the energy on my body and my mind, the story, the action, all the figures, the characters. This reminded me to ask you, how did you felt when you finished this book after the long period of writing?
Exhausted, absolutely exhausted. Although to be honest, I'm sure every writer says this: you don't finish a book. You know, there's no one day in which you put it. There's no one day when you close the page and say it's done. I mean, I read the book now and I still want to make changes. But books are never.
But was it different comparing to your other books? The story is quite intense.
It was different. I actually enjoyed writing some of this. I don't normally enjoy writing. Sometimes I teach creative writing to students, and I always tell them, if you're having fun, it's probably not working. I think writing is often like climbing a mountain. It's really hard work. There will be a fantastic view when you get to the top, but on the way up, it'll hurt.
I ask all these questions because this is not kind of the books that we find nowadays, because it has a lot of actions. It has 3 lines of the story. So I think it for the writer, it's more challenging that those kind of book that tells the story of one person or a very short line of history.
I think we divide the world of books into genre fiction, you know, police, crime, romance, spy thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, and then there's literature on the other side. And literature has to be more subdued, quieter, more well-behaved. I wanted to steal some of the things from genre fiction. Why can't we have fun with literature as well? Why can't we travel through time, travel through space, do extraordinary things? I think I was also looking back to novels of the 19th century. Literary novels of the 19th century don't feel embarrassed about being big, including lots of things, and enjoying themselves.
What was the starting point for this book? We have a big theme that that comes from Shakespeare play, but when did you decide that you want to write this book?
Okay, it's a slightly long and complicated answer, so let me tell you.
Okay.
A British publisher, Hogarth Press, some years ago started to do novelizations of plays by Shakespeare. There's, I have some here.
Shakespeare for the 21st century.
Yes, the novel version. Jeanette Winterson wrote a version of A Winter's Tale. Margaret Atwood wrote a version of The Tempest. I like the idea, but Shakespeare is a very, very good writer. I didn't want to take a masterpiece and write a bad version in prose. So I put the idea to one side. And then several years later, I was rereading Pericles by Shakespeare.
By chance?
It's not very good. So I thought, why not? Why not do a version of one of Shakespeare's bad plays? That will give me the freedom to be creative, to mess about with it. There's something else very important which happens in this play. At the beginning, it starts with what the play calls an incestuous relationship between a king and his daughter, the princess. It's what we'd call sexual abuse nowadays. This poor woman, she's given no name. She has 2 lines in the play. Pericles comes to marry her, but he discovers the truth and he runs away. And the adventures he has running away, that is the play.
Okay.
I wanted to do a version of the play which gave this woman a name and a voice and some power, which she doesn't have in the original.
Okay. But were you reading Pericles by chance, or do you read often Shakespeare works?
Over here, we read Shakespeare all the time.
At breakfast.
Breakfast. We have to read 1 play a month. It's the law.
Oh. But how do you describe your relationship with the Shakespeare legacy? It's impossible to avoid this such amount of works, literary themes, and characters.
It's important on a very small scale and on a big scale as well. One of the extraordinary things about Shakespeare is how many words and phrases slip into everyday English, which come from Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. So modern English has been in part invented by Shakespeare, so you can't escape it. But a lot of the plays are, every generation rediscovers the plays. Mm-hmm. Quite often the world changes and leaves a writer behind. Mm-hmm. Something peculiar about Shakespeare means that we can go back to The Tempest or to Othello or to Macbeth or to King Lear and look at them in a different way and find that they're saying things about our society now which we didn't expect. It's really interesting to go back to King Lear and realize it might be a play about dementia, for example.
Yes,
or to go back to Hamlet and see there's a very good study of a young man who's suffering from deep depression. You know, there are so many ways to come at Shakespeare.
So do you have this play, this character, and the play also deals with adventures and life overseas. This is also a subject that interested you?
I think I was bored of the books I was writing.
Okay.
I was writing too many books about people like me. I wanted the chance to write bigger stories set in larger places. Mm-hmm. The other great thing about Shakespeare, I don't know if there's an equivalent writer in Portuguese, but Shakespeare invented a version of the past which is not quite real. Mm-hmm. In Shakespeare's version of the past, you're allowed to have Roman emperors and galleons at the same time. It's a mixture of Elizabethan England and ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I think we recognize it instantly. We also know it's not real, but it feels real to us. And I think he allowed me to enter that world. And once you've entered that world, you can do almost anything. You know, history doesn't matter. Getting it right doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. That also explains why you have 3 timelines in your book. You give yourself a lot of freedom.
Well, yes, there are several reasons for that. Because I was writing about this woman who's a victim of sexual abuse in the play, but when we read the play, it doesn't seem like that because it's set in the past. Mm-hmm. So many violent things happen in ancient literature, and we forget that they are real human beings who are suffering. And I wanted to say that this story deals with a subject which is really important right now, that this is something from which someone is suffering in your street, in your office. You know people to whom this is happening. So I wanted to start in the present so that the reader understood that the subject was real and it mattered. But then I wanted to travel back in time. So at the same time, we could have fun with pirates and shipwrecks and sword fights. But you're right, there's a third timeline in there, isn't there?
Yeah, with William Shakespeare. With William Shakespeare himself.
Well, there's 2 characters in it. I realized that because I had the freedom to go anywhere. Once you have 2 timelines, you can have as many as you want. And because I was having an argument with Shakespeare's play, I thought, why not travel back in time and meet Shakespeare? But we meet Shakespeare, but we also meet a man called George Wilkins, who is the co-writer of Pericles. Mm-hmm. one of the reasons Pericles is not a very good play is because it was half written by Shakespeare, half written by George Wilkins, who was a terrible, terrible human being. He wrote one other play. He ran a tavern. He was a brothel keeper, and he physically abused women. And we know a lot about him because he appears in court records of the time. He found himself in court for the physical abuse of women. So I decided to travel back to London to meet Shakespeare, to meet George Wilkins, and to have George Wilkins die a terrible death. One of the great enjoyments of writing novels is you can take characters you don't like and you can make dreadful things happen to them.
You really enjoyed that part, so didn't you?
Yeah.
I do. I think one of the strange things about enjoying things in a novel, it's very unlike real life. At some point in the novel, I think I can say that there's a plane crash. I have a profound fear of flying. For many years, I was unable to get on a plane. And then I was convinced that I would die every time I got on a plane. I had to take a huge amount of diazepam and red wine to get on a plane. Now I only need a bit of diazepam.
Yeah.
But writing about a plane crash is like exorcising a ghost.
Yeah.
Making everyone else frightened of flying makes me feel better.
Well, in fact, in the book, there's a plane crash. There's boats that sink, and there's also a horse car that gets an accident. So you cover all the ways of transportation.
Yeah, you've missed the house burning down after
The
struck by
house
lightning.
burning. I
do like a disaster.
In fact, the book also deals with natural forces, like the tempest in the end, and also human choices. Were you aware of these two elements defining the characters?
One of the strange things, because I had a story to start with, I took the story from the original play. So I knew where it was going and I knew roughly what would happen. In one sense, that makes it easier to write. You don't have to think too hard about the structure. What then becomes very hard is to make those characters do those things as if they are real choices. That was one of the enjoyable things for me. And it's one thing I enjoy in all writing, is taking an old story and putting real human beings into it and saying, how would it feel from the inside to be in this situation? So I know what these characters are going to do, but I still want to make them feel as if they are making that choice freely on the page.
Yeah, because like all the ancient Greek plays and also with Shakespeare plays, what we call fate or the will of the gods has an important role. And for these characters, they are also toys in the hands of the gods, as we could say.
I think they become toys in my hands.
Of course, yeah.
We don't, obviously most of us don't, but most of us don't believe in fate now. It doesn't have a very big meaning in our lives. I think most of us feel we are to some extent free. But in a novel, fate still exists, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the writer has already decided, and there are quite a few times in the novel where I will suggest what is going to happen in advance to a character. So in truth, I have become God. And because it's a novel about storytelling, and because a lot of the stories are told by this young woman, Angelica, at the beginning of the story, we're not sure whether some of these things are real or whether she's telling the story.
She's imagining.
And there are moments when the characters in these stories sort of become aware that they might be characters in a story, very slightly. And I think that's a sensation that we all get sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Most of the time we feel real. And then just occasionally we feel that life is being done to us. Someone else is in charge. You know, we're like a train on tracks and we don't have much choice. And that's an experience that some of the characters have in the novel.
Well, for everybody who's listening, how would you describe the story? We have the first part of the one part of the book that you have already talked about, but the other part centered in Pericles. How would you describe it?
So we start in the present day with this young woman and her father. There's an abusive relationship. A young Greek man turns up. He's interested in this woman to find out about her, what's going on. He realizes the horrible truth and he runs away, pursued by her father. He takes a journey on a boat to the Mediterranean. And as we travel to the Mediterranean, he travels back through time. That's one of the passages I enjoyed most in the whole book, able to do time travel in a literary novel. Mm-hmm. And he finds himself in something like the 1st century BC. And he visits various cities and becomes involved in various other stories. There are plagues, there are plots, there are assassinations. The story is about a family being torn apart and then being thrown together again. Mm-hmm. So the bulk of the book is set in this this slightly fake past that we all recognize and understand. It's about a family being ripped apart, and we're always asking, will they find their way back to each other?
Mm-hmm. I also thought that this one of the major themes were this idea that comes back to Homer and the Odysseus, that returning home. You are returning home after 10, 40, 20 years of adventure and some good and bad experience.
Yes, I think isn't that's the theme of nearly every great piece of literature, isn't it? Either returning to the same home or returning to a new home. There's that great structure, isn't it? All stories are meant to be about a young person leaving home, having adventures, and then ending up at a new home through a marriage or through some other event, finding a new place to be at home. I remember when I wrote Curious Incident, one of the very peculiar things about that novel is it's a circular novel in which the main character starts at home and ends up at home again in exactly the same place, which is exactly what he wants. Most novels, it's not a circle, it's a spiral, isn't it? You go around in a circle, you find yourself a place which is similar but different. Things have changed. It's a new home now.
The book has, well, this Greek and Roman environment, and also has this life on sea with a lot of technical issues. Did you went to a long investigation to write this book?
No. The internet is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whenever I've done research for a book, it's always been wasted. I've put a lot of effort in and I've thrown almost everything away. What I like to do is not to learn everything about a subject. What I like to find out is what I call the poetry of the technical vocabulary. So I didn't find out how to sail a ship in the 15th century or a ship in the 1st century BC. I read several books and I went through Wikipedia and I found out the most interesting, flavoursome facts about those ships. So what you read is not a guide to how to sail those ships. It's just my list of all my favourite facts about those ships. Because I think what makes something real is not because you've got it right, but because you write convincingly. And writing convincingly is about finding the details that really stand out, that really sing.
Okay. But it was a book easy to read, to write, because you have a very fast pace in the book, and you have a lot of stories, a lot of scenes, and we get the idea that you had to choose between the big possibilities that this story could have. How did you deal with that process, and how was the experience?
I often forget how difficult it was to write a novel. I think when female friends talk about having given birth, you forget how painful it is. If you remembered how painful it is, you wouldn't do it again. You'd just say no. But I do remember it really enjoying the process at times this time. But I also remember a lot of time spent with flow charts, with bits of text all over the floor, and trying to arrange in different shapes. That got very complicated. The individual scenes were really enjoyable to write. What was much harder was the structure and throwing away things that didn't work as well.
Did you throw away a lot of things?
I always throw away things.
Even characters?
No, because it's based on a play. I knew who the characters had to be. Yes, it was scenes that had to be thrown away.
Okay. And the characters are sometimes on a hunt, but sometimes they are being hunted. It depends on the situation. Did you like this ambiguity of the characters that are at the same time strong and weak? I imagine that comes from the play.
Yes, in fact, the passage which you asked me to read is precisely about that, isn't it? It's about it's about a man who sees himself as a hero, who's very good at being a hero. He's strong, he's brave, but he reaches a point when he realizes that those are not very useful skills in real life. That the hardest fights are not fights with swords or guns. The hardest fights are the ones you have with your family, with your partner, with your own past, or the fights you have inside your own mind. So, and I think there are several characters who go through that, who realize that this external world of adventure is in fact easy compared to the much harder adventures you can have in your own house and in your own mind.
Reading this book in 21st century, with all, well, we are always talking about the networks and social media, but one thing that touches is that the possibility of having a new life, the possibility that going undercover, because in some passage the characters, do you feel that you are also trying to push the readers to another dimension, to another world that it's not full of image and social contacts, digital life?
Well, on the one hand, it is great to go back in time, to forget technology, to keep everything very simple. And as a writer, that's a gift. But as you were talking, I realized something else as well. A lot of the book is about disguise. It's about changing from one person into another. In fact, there are sometimes pairs of characters in the novel in different timelines. And you think, are they the same person? Are they not? So there are these people having parallel lives. I now realize that in one way, that's a celebration of fiction, isn't it? That's one of the things that we get from fiction. You know, whether it's 2,000 years ago or whether it's yesterday. Whatever the technology around us is like, we can still perform that really simple but amazing magic trick. You know, you can open a book, and if it's a good book and it swallows you, if it takes you in, you become someone else. That's what happens when we read a good book.
But in your book, there's an open end. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think we cannot find a morality also. And sometimes in Shakespeare plays or in the ancient Greek plays, we have also a big conclusion that spots to the viewer. Did you want this open end and not a morality end?
Well, I think there are two questions there. One isn't having an ambiguous ending. I do like an ambiguous ending. I do like people to go away and argue about what happens at the end of the book, and maybe that's personal taste, but I like to leave readers asking questions. As for the morality, I think if you're trying to convince readers to see the world in a certain way, you will push readers away. What you want to do is create a world, and then to make that world vivid and real, and then allow readers to make up their own minds about it. It's like in real life, someone who's trying to sort of force you to share their opinion. That's uncomfortable. We don't like that. But I think what there is in this world, and I hope it underlies all my books, there's no obvious morality, but there is hopefully a generosity. The idea that we should try and inhabit the minds of other people, however different they are from the rest of us. Even if they're really unpleasant characters, it's important for me to try and understand how they experience the world, why they act in a way that is sinister, unkind, immoral. You know, they're still human beings. I'm still interested in
that makes more easy to write about such strong and evil characters like Philip in this book.
Yes, I mean, I'm fascinated by all human beings. I mean, not so much the boring human beings. people who have extreme experiences. I love people's stories, not simply what they do, but how they experience the world. I'm always asking people questions about the inside of their head. The inside of people's heads are the most interesting things in the universe. And the people who are very different from us are the ones who are particularly interesting, I think. I also think it's important, and this is a moral question as well. There are terrible things in the world, and we can call them evil and push them away and not think about them, or we can look hard at the difficult things and not turn away. And I think, in a moral sense, that's an important thing to do. Not to push things away, but to look things in the face, whether it's death, whether it's cruelty, whether it's prejudice. Just ask ourselves honestly, what is happening? Why is it happening?
Do you want to return to these characters?
No.
Continuing in this old history?
I don't want to return to these characters, but I can see that world is very, very tempting. That world, there's a lot of freedom in that world. I think if I went back to it in the next novel, that would be a mistake. But I think it's calling me. I may return to that place again.
This book reminds me of that famous quotation, all the stories that started with "Once upon a time." For you, the world of literature, the world of writing, also started with "Once upon a time." The stories that you heard on your family, with your friends.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I didn't. As a child, I grew up in a house. It wasn't a very bookish household, and I didn't read many storybooks when I was young. What I read was science. I was obsessed with science. So I read encyclopedias. I read about the history of fossil man. I read about physics, and I read about maths. I loved maths, and for a long time I thought I would be a mathematician or a scientist. And I think it was only when I was 14 that I started to read poetry and novels, and it was a revelation. It was just so much richer and more interesting. But in another life, I would have become a very bad scientist or a very bad mathematician. But luckily, I saved myself and found literature instead. So as a child, I was never saying "Once upon a time."
But was there any decisive encounter, decisive moment in this in that period when you started writing poetry and other books?
Well, I started reading poetry. Yes, I was doing what we call the O-level exam over here. So I was 14 years old. I was given 2 books in particular. One was the selected poetry of R.S. Thomas. He's a Welsh poet, not very well known. And another collection called Conflict and Compassion, edited by a man called John Scull. It started with a section of poems about nuclear war, and it just got darker and darker and darker. I think some of the children in that class are probably still having psychotherapy to cope with it. But there were some amazing poems in there. I'd never read good poetry for adults before. And I still remember that electric feeling of seeing someone choose a load of ordinary words and just arranging them on the page, and you read them and it just sets off fireworks inside your head. That was just so exciting. And I think the course of my life changed, on those days when I first opened those 2 books.
Do you seek that electric feeling when you write?
When I read, but not when I write. Often because I rewrite a lot. I don't think I've ever written a good sentence first time. I don't think I'm a very good natural writer, but I do think I'm a good editor. So everything I write will be rewritten 20, 30, 40, 50 times. And I do know that some of the things I write work, and hopefully some of them are good. But I can't really reread them because I've seen it so many times. I can't come to it with a fresh eye. Very occasionally, I'll pick up one of my own books and I'll open it at random and I'll see a sentence that really works, and that'll give me a great pleasure. But I have to pretend it's not my book. I have to sneak up and take it off the bookshelf and look.
In the beginning, we talk about this some kind of artificial division of young adults and adults fiction. But you started by the young adults area. Was it a rational decision, a clear decision, or was something that was put after?
It was a rational decision because I couldn't believe that I would become a writer for adults. It was too grandiose an idea. But I was also an illustrator. And I thought maybe I can write and illustrate books for young readers. And I wrote many that didn't work, and eventually it did work. And that became my living for a while. That's what I did. But I always wanted to write for adults as well. And slowly that took over. I don't think there's a huge difference between the two. I think good books for children are often very, very demanding to write. But I think there is one difference. It's not that books for adults can be about sex and violence. There are plenty of children's books which are about sex and violence these days. But books for adults deal with some of the subjects you don't understand until you are over 20, about getting old, about paying a mortgage, owning a house, about coping with elderly parents, for example, about what it means to have children, what it means to have difficult children. You can't really talk about those subjects easily in books for young readers. And as you get older, those subjects take up more and more of your life. So when I was younger, I wanted to write for the person I was when I was 10 years old, 6 years old. And now I want to write for the person I am now.
We have a comment here I would like to point out that we shared your illustration for Social Distance, the one you published in The Guardian. Yeah, we shared that link. And the question is, how do you handle being so ridiculous? You do a little bit of everything. You not only in the past worked with children and adults, but you do illustrate writing, although the writing for young adults and adults can be the same because the message can be the same, but it has to be written in a different tone. And I'm sure the curious incident was not only testimony of how good a novel can be, and when a good novel is well written, it can be read by everybody. But it's very hard to accomplish all those sides. How do you handle that? Because it pops out. Now I have to illustrate. Now I have to write something. I'll go into Shakespeare.
I realize that
it's like a washing machine tumbling.
I realize that from the outside, it probably looks as if I'm able to do many things, and on any day I could choose which to do. Which of these 7 things will I do today?
Yeah.
On the inside, I spend most days unable to do anything. I have bursts. I'm very unsatisfied with what I do, and I realize I can draw and I can paint a bit, but I'm usually unable to do either. Writer's block is my normal state, and occasionally something comes up. For example, that story I did for The Guardian, that story with pictures, I enjoyed doing that, and it seemed to work very well. But then I thought, what else can I do with that style? There must be another thing I can use it for, and I couldn't work out how to use it. It was a dead end. So perhaps I should call myself someone who goes down a lot of dead ends.
There's another question. Do you think you can change behaviors with your books, mainly among young adults? Isabel is asking us.
Oh, I think if you write a book intending to change people's behavior, you will fail. People hate being told what to do, don't they? If people see that a book is trying to tell them what to do or what not to do, they will put it down.
But you were telling that at least you want people to stay questioning. You want to leave them questioning, and that can be behavior changing.
It can. It's a very subtle change, isn't it? I hope that by reading books about people who are different, who have different perspectives, who come from different groups, it helps enlarge your mind. But I think we have to remember that it's a horrible truth that some of the worst people in the world, the worst dictators, used to sit down in the evening and read Homer and listen to Schubert. We would love art to make people better. And sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about that division of young adult and adult fiction, and that drive us to, well, the curious incident that it's your novel that introduced you to a larger audience, I must say, even in Portugal. So how did you decide, now I want to write for adults in commas, and end up with such an extraordinary novel?
Well, I thought Curious Incident was a novel for adults at first, actually. But then we took it to various publishers, and then an adult publisher wanted it and a young adult publisher wanted it. So I didn't realize I was writing a novel that would get sold to such a wide range of people. It took me completely by surprise. So I thought I'd crossed a boundary then, but in fact I was just sitting on top of the boundary. I was sort of halfway between two worlds.
And how you deal with such a great success?
I try to ignore it completely ignore it.
How do you do that?
Oh, my family keep my feet on the ground. My family remind me that I'm very, very normal.
Like what? Wash the dishes? Go wash the dishes.
Yes. It is very, very important to wash the dishes and do the hoovering. That's a moral point, I think. However big a success you have, do the dishes, do the hoovering. And it's important. I think if you have a success like Curious Incident, if you're not careful, your job can become the person who wrote Curious Incident. I could spend my life doing interviews and events about that book. And in fact, about 5 or 6 years ago, I officially stopped doing events about Curious Incident because it was just filling my head. I needed space and light inside my head to think about other things. Yes, so I try to put it behind me. I often describe it as a gold-plated ball and chain.
Okay.
So
we have
I'm
another.
tied down. Yes, go on.
We have another question, but I'll also after I would like to ask you, how did you pass through this quarantine, and if any idea popped to your head? But first we are going to the other question.
Okay, so I can go with Adelaide's question. If you enjoy writing for readers of your current age, do you see yourself writing for older people, not just adults, but people who are plus 70? What kind of subjects do you imagine they will enjoy reading about? You've covered all.
I know people who are.
We are giving you highlights for the new book.
I know people who are 92 years old and they seem younger than people who are 25. I think adult is one big category. I mean, I started thinking about death when I was about 18. So that's been a constant subject for me all the way through. I think I just meant I wanted to write books for the adult person that I am now. I mean, to be honest, I still don't feel that I've grown up. I sometimes think when I get to the age of 85, I'll still feel I haven't quite grown up yet. But I'm writing for the me that's 56, but also 18, but also 80. To answer your other question about the lockdown, I'm a writer. My life is mostly in lockdown all the time. I just have more children in my office at the moment.
So you have a long YA career, a lot of books in that area, and now you have also a lot of books in adults using these categories. But in these days, how do you define a project? How do you advance to a project? How do you say, well, this is one that I want to go through with all 1-2 years of writing and all the stuff that involves?
You mean how do I define whether it's for young people or adults?
No. How do you choose your project?
Oh.
How do you say, I want to work about this one?
It's the other way around. I have lots of ideas. Nearly all of them won't work. The thing not choosing what to work on. The difficult thing is taking all these ideas and realizing which ones are rubbish. I know that most of the ideas I have are garbage. They will need to be thrown away. But I won't discover that until I've sat down and worked on them for a little while. So that becomes the hard thing. Having ideas is quite easy, but finding the good ones is really hard.
One of our readers, Isabel, she posed a question earlier, and she has another one, but she's telling. She's 58, but I feel like having 25. She's the young spirit. And she asks you if your characters are inspired in real life or just pure imagination. I take that you are a very keen observer of everybody. Yeah. So you shouldn't be in lockdown much and should be studying people in their natural environment, like an Attenborough kind of thing.
I think it's a combination. Yeah, I listen to people all the time, and in fact, I also do regular voluntary work. So I work with people who are in quite extreme situations, but part of that is just listening to people's stories, trying to help them, trying to understand them. But I have a constant hunger for that. I'm always interested in people's stories. So it's hard to write a character that isn't based to some extent on people you know, people you've met, people you've talked to. But also, I don't think a character works unless you become that character. You can't get a character right from the outside. I think characters only work when you are inside that character's head. So in a sense, all the big characters that I've written only started to work when I could be them. So in a strange kind of way, everything is very slightly autobiographical. If I can't imagine myself in that person, it won't work.
I figured that out when we meet George Wilkins in the book. He's nearly dying, and you've escaped a similar fate yourself. So but not. I'm just talking about the heart attack. How much of that time you faced in the hospital, perhaps, when you read Angelica in a latest moments, and the idea that she probably it's all her imagination or not, how much of it came from that time, from your own personal experience of being somewhere in between, not knowing the future?
The strange thing was, I'm not sure whether people listening will know the story, but in the book, George Wilkins, in fact, suffers a horrible heart attack. But early last year, I had a triple heart bypass. So my chest was cut open and bits inside me were rearranged. It was a serious operation. But that happened.
You have a PhD already.
So that happened after the novel. The strange thing is I wrote about a heart attack, but then I was in hospital having a heart operation. I didn't have a heart attack. There was something wrong. And you're right. It is anyone who's had a serious hospital operation knows that it leaves you in a very, very strange state. You're sort of floating a long way away from the world for quite a while.
And the fogginess that comes every time you enter a new timeline in your book. You feel like you're wandering somewhere. You never know exactly what it is. And I thought,
except it was very different, actually. The experience in the book, I always want everything to be very precise. When you sort of travel through time or you travel to a different place, the reader might be confused, but everything's in focus. We can see things very, very clearly. Whereas the fog that I was in after being in hospital was just fog. Fog is bad. I couldn't write for nearly a year. There's a thing we call pump brain. The pump is the machine that takes your blood out of your body, puts oxygen into it and puts it back into your body when you're unconscious for 4 hours. And it's thought that affects you badly in some way. They don't quite understand. But everyone who has a significant operation with the blood going through that machine feels foggy for about a year afterwards. It's called pump brain. I hated it. I couldn't read properly. I couldn't write. But so that's a very different experience from strangeness in the novel, which I hope is always precise and accurate.
Oh yeah.
So you at the same time you are saying that you are back on writing.
Yes, slowly, but I'm back on writing and throwing writing away. Those are my two occupations.
And how is Mark?
I've written a couple of short stories. That's so far, yeah.
We are almost in the end, but how is Mark out of office?
You mean, what do I do when I'm not writing? I love being outdoors. I need to be outdoors. You'll notice in the Porpoise, there's a lot of coast and a lot of forests. I like water and I like forests and I like mountains. One of the things that is hard about lockdown is that can't get to the coast and lakes and mountains. The place we had a holiday booked in Snowdonia in North Wales, among the mountains, and that's one of the few, for me, one of the few negative things about my lockdown is not being able to get to the mountains. So I'm waiting to be released.
And for the last question, there are two major boats in the novel, the Purpose and the Serpent. Why did you choose the Purpose for the title, or Golfinho in Portuguese?
Well, there's only Pericles, as I said, it's not a very good play. Most plays by Shakespeare have many, many lines you can quote, and many, many lines which have entered the English language, which everyone recognizes. In Pericles, there are only 2 lines, I think, which are worth quoting. And there's one little insignificant line where a fisherman talks about having looked out to sea and seen a porpoise, and he says, "The porpoise, how he bounced and tumbled." I love that phrase because bounced and tumbled are words you use of an acrobat on dry land. The way he talks about a porpoise as an acrobat, as like a sort of creature at the circus. It has a poetry which I love, that line. So I just stole the word porpoise from my favorite line in the play. But as you will know, I've now realized that porpoise is a lovely word in English. In almost every language, it's not a great word.
Yeah.
So many foreign editions are called the dolphin.
Yeah.
Dolphins and porpoises are quite close, but they're not the same thing. So I wrote a novel called The Porpoise in English, but it's traveling around the world under the name The Dolphin.
Well, thank you so much for your time and attention and all your sympathy.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I hope to have you here and to give you to know our coast, which we have a lot. Agradeço a todos os que estiveram a ver. Muito obrigado também a ti, Ricardo, pelo teu tempo. E espero que esta conversa vos tenha inspirado a ler o Golfinho, um romance magnífico, uma verdadeira homenagem à mais pura tradição dos livros de aventura. Boa noite e obrigada a todos.
Bye bye.
Deus.